Hello, my little subjects. It is I, your Kingofdoom11, and you join me back with some more book reading of my favourite book series, the Elves Trilogy. We are now doing chapter 3 of A Darkness Forged in Fire. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoy. So in chapter 3, yeah, here we go. Kanoa Swift Dragon didn't trust trees, not since he'd fallen out of one when he was a child of 6 years. His relationship with them had gotten worse since then. He spun around quickly to face behind him, alert for any sign of movement. The game path he followed was bare. The trees are to either side, big, brown, green, and motionless. Good. Something buzzed by his ear, and he slapped a hand against his neck and then held it out in front of his face to examine the kill. He grunted with satisfaction, for at least one black fly would no longer torment him. "That'll teach you," he said, wiping his hand on the bark of the nearby tree. He grabbed the canteen slung across his shoulder, took a drink, and looking around at this strange, sweltering forest that was now his home. The miasma of sounds and smells assaulted him at every turn. Bugs, birds, and furred beasts twittered, chittered, spewed, cawed, oozed, growled, yelped, and bit all day, and most aggravatingly all night. The trees secreted bucketfuls of cloying sap, the smell every bit as vile as the former palace ball he'd once attended at the height of the summer years ago in the Kalarian capital. Between the stink and the rackets, there was enough to make him despise the forest, but fate, it seemed, wasn't satisfied with that. On top of everything else, Kanoa was certain the trees were watching him. Worse, he had growing suspicion that they were trying to tell him something. He walked up to one, even reaching out a hand to pat it, but it looked and acted just like a tree, being absolutely inscrutable as it stood there. "It's just the heat," he decided, wiping the sweat from his brow. Alfkina was suffocatingly hot in the summer, humid in the snowless winters, and miserable the rest of the year. He was, as he had been for the past year, alone in a forest. It brought to the mind the angry words he shouted all those years ago as he clutched his broken arm and kicked the trunk of that tree that had let him fall. "I hate the forest and I don't want to be an elf anymore." Decades later, the sentiment remained. Sighing, Kanoa dropped the canteen to his side and held his hand out before him, palms up, wondering if he would ever hold his own fate again. He looked closer at his hand. His natural tan colour was deepening to a hue close to the reddish-brown bark of the trees around him. "Great," he thought, "I'm turning into a bloody tree." He ran his hands through the tangled thatch of long black hair on his head, half expecting to feel leaves sprouting there. Instead, his fingers brushed against the tops of his ears, feeling the point on the night light and the ragged scar tissue on the left where the point used to be. The mutilation hadn't been by choice, but he wasn't overly upset with the result. He had never been comfortable with his heritage. Kanoa closed his eyes and let the forest talk to him. Nothing. He opened one to see if anything had changed, and a largely brightly coloured snake wound its way up the trunk of an old bent teak. Using the tree's flaky, pale grey bark for grip, the snake paused, turning to look at him. Its tongue darted in and out of its mouth, testing the air. Kanoa closed his eyes again and focused his thoughts on the snake, but all he could sense was how foolish he was for trying. He gave up and sought out the trees themselves. They were nothing like the lean, straight pines and firs, or thick of the limb-heavy oaks he had known as a child. Here, everything curved, from the trunks to the trees, to the creatures and the vines that crawled over them. Even the leaves were different, some wide and flat, others garishly green and bitter to the taste. He tried a new approach. "You're an elf," he reminded himself. "Born of the natural world, you're supposed to be able to do this." He slowed his breathing and willed his body to relax, trying to let the forest infuse him with its essence. Infuse? Essence? He shook his head. This was pointless. Everything teemed with life, and all had voices, yet he heard only noise, felt only chaos. It had been the same the day he walked into the birthing meadow and became an elf of the Long Watch. He remembered the mix of excitement and fear as he entered the most sacred realm, the Harver, the deep forest. Seeking a sapling cub among the tender green shoots to become his right foe, his bond brother. Let your spirit walk among them, and one shall call to you, he was told. So he stayed in the meadow for 5 straight days, without food or water, waiting and hoping. When the elves finally carried him out because he was too weak to walk, no sapling cub had yet called to him. The wolf oaks, the very embodiment of the natural world, had measured him, found him, wanting, and rejected him. He thought still rankled. Even Elf Witch and the elders told stories to scare wayward children, and had found a sapling cub with which to bond. Knowing it was fruitless, but trying in any way, he now raised his arms high into the air and called again to the trees around him. His only answer was a swarm of gnats that flew into his mouth. Exasperated and spitting bugs, Kanoa lowered his arms and squirmed inside the tattered and patched remnants of his uniform. The Kalarian Imperial Army green had faded to dirty white, and his knees and elbows sported ill-sewn patches of black leather from his knapsack. His musket, however, was in perfect condition. He let his left hand brush against the stock and smiled at the cold, lifeless feel of the wood and steel entwined. This weapon would work if he kept his powder dry and the moving parts oiled. If not, he felt in tune with it, as the oath weapons of the wolf oaks bestowed on their Reichfar elves required. A rumbling growl made Kanoa turn. Jur, his companion of the last year, and probably the sole reason Kanoa had not gone stark raving mad out here, stood a foot away, having sneaked up on Kanoa without the elf hearing a thing. "You're better at this than me," he said, lightly wrapping the Bengar between the eyes with his knuckle. Jur snorted and stood his woolly head staring up at him with big black eyes. Jur was larger than a dire wolf, larger than even a tiger, sporting a coat of short midnight fur, streaked through with dull red strips. His fur featured a stubby, well-whiskered muzzle, and a furry mantle of thick hair ran halfway down his back. At the moment he was marking his territory, forcing Kanoa to jump back a pace. A swarm of black flies rose up from Jur's back as his long tail swished menacingly around his hindquarters. When he was done, Jur padded it over on all 4 paws, rubbing against him and purring deep, contented sound that made Kanoa's body vibrate. They were quite a pair, Kanoa mused, scratching the Bengar behind his ears. The feel of Jur's coarse fur reminded him of the bark that he looked again at the forest that had become his home. Cathedral light fell like shafts of gold between the trunks, and the sun dipped below the tops of the trees. It was kind of the moment his father had urged him to commune with, to which to find his centre and become one with the forest. Kanoa snorted. It was the kind of moment when he wanted a tankard of beer and a grilled sausage. A light breeze sighed between the branches, evaporating the sweat from his forehead after the heat of the past 2 weeks. It was a welcome change. They would even better once he and Jur were back at the hut with the door firmly in place. It was not wise to be out in the open when the moon climbed the sky. Jur growled and shook his woolly head, indicating he had enough. Kanoa lifted his hand and moved off. Lifting the stock of his muzzle out of the way, he squatted with some difficulty, his left knee twinging in protest, a souvenir from an orc lancer many years before. He grabbed a handful of dirt and sifted it through his hands, mimicking the actions of the hunter elves he watched all through his childhood years. His hands tingled with the power of the natural order, but he had no idea what to do with it. Kanoa shivered in spite of the heat, dropping the dirt as if stung. "Let's go home," he said. Jer stared at him with apparent disdain. Kanoa wasn't sure he didn't deserve it. They walked for several minutes before he found a tree that he had noticed earlier in the day with a small hunting hatchet. He had notched earlier the day with a small hunting hatchet. Cutting a tree was as much as an act of defiance as an aid to navigation. The elves of his tribe would have been appalled to see him deface a tree with a steel axe. But they weren't here to guide him. Feeling smug, Kanoa lengthened his stride. He took one complete step and pitched forward to an unseen hollow. Yurka Umo. Kanoa swore as he fell. Yurka Umo! Kanoa swore as he fell. He landed with a thud. As he lay there clutching his breath, he realised with some surprise that he used a tribal curse invoking summer lightning in the forest's most feared predator. "I'm going native," he thought. Pushing himself up to his hands and knees, he froze halfway up before coming face to face with the hindquarters of only one severely agitated skunk dragon. "Yurka!" Kanoa shouted, scrambling back as the awful-smelling fire burst forth. He began to roll and beat at the flames, all while gagging on the stench. Jer growled and wagged his tail ferociously at the little black dragon, and there was no help at all. Kanoa rolled out and beat out the last of the foul-smelling flames, cursing all the while. He staggered to his feet, wielding his musket like a club, ready to dash the animal's brains onto the forest floor, but the dragon had already scampered off. Finally, running out of breath, he leaned his musket against the tree, unstopped his canteen, and poured the contents over his head. He stood like that for several seconds, his face dripping, his chest heaving, and his eyes darting wildly from side to side, like an elf possessed. When the roar of blood in his ears quieted it enough for him to hear the perpetual hum of the forest, he flung away the canteen. No sooner did he had thrown it away and watched it disappear among the trees than he realised he needed it. Kanoa took stock of his situation. Aside from what he felt like a bad case of sunburn, he was uninjured. His uniform, however, was absolutely ruined. He stripped off the cartridge pouch, shirt, boots, and trousers, leaving only his loincloth on as he gingerly hopped from foot to foot on the carpet of nettles from the bush-like tree he found himself under. After a few moments of that, Kanoa decided it was time to try something new. Thoughts of a clean, cool water by the hut spurred him to action. Shooting a withering glance at Jer, he put his boots back on and carefully brushing any clinging nettles off his bare feet. Flies, gnats, and a dozen other bugs he couldn't identify were now buzzing about his head, but none dared land. The stench of the skunk dragon, acting as the first effective remedy he found to keep them at bay. Picking up his musket, he hung his sword, cloves, and pouches from the muzzle and rested the weapon on his shoulder. "What else can go wrong?" he muttered as he started to walk for home, with Jer padding alongside at a discreet distance. The unmistakable sound of a tree falling carried in the twilight, and for the briefest of moments Kanoa sensed pain. It was gone so fast he wasn't sure it had happened. But when he looked over at Jer and knew something wasn't right, the Bengal stood stiff-legged, his ears straight up, muzzle sniffing the air. "It's nothing," Kanoa lied and kept walking, anxious to outpace the smell that clung to him. The light was fading quickly now, and he wanted to get back to the hut before it was completely dark. The sound of the forest changed at night, a subtle, gradual shift that crept up on the unsuspecting, along with things that made no sound at all. Kanoa turned to scold Jer to move along. The Bengal was gone. "Jer? Jer?" he called softly. Jer had excellent hearing, but that wasn't why Kanoa kept his voice low. The forest had gone silent. The constant hum of life that surged through the trees was absent. The forest was preternaturally stiff. as if time itself had ceased to exist. Not good, Kanoa whispered to himself, as he tipped the cloves from his musket and began to load the weapon just to be safe. Cradling the musket in front of his body, Kanoa checked that the flint was still secure, then half-cocked the hammer as his old regiment and collect sounded in his ears. Heavenly Spirit, who watch over us, he fisted out a cartridge from his pouch with his right hand, bringing the wax paper tube up to his mouth in one practice motion, and biting off the end. Guide us into battle and make sure our hand. The gunpowder mixed with his saliva as he grimaced at the familiar salty bitter taste, that we might slay our enemy. The weight of the small lead bullet pushed against his tongue, and then he heard again and the whip crack of regimental pennants unfurled in the gusting wind, the creaking timber of gun carriages and whinnying of horses, the pounding of their hooves and the echoing barks of sergeants relaying in officers' commands destroyed him as those who went before us. A tremor anticipation coursed through Kanoa's body. And keep our honoured place as your faithful servants. You harbingers of death, we are the warriors of the Hunter. We fear nothing, for we are iron elves. Amen, Kanoa said it out loud, no longer alone. He prepared his musket for firing to the cadence of a sergeant long ago dead, killed by a swarm of battle-crazed orcs in the land even more foreign than this. Something cold and black touched Kanoa. Then he felt the presence of the lost souls of his old regiment, and he trickled the gunpowder into the pan of the musket before closing the hammer. Keeping time with the past, he set the musket butt down in front of him and poured the remaining charge down the barrel before stuffing the lead ball and finally the paper cartridge after it. Without pause, he pulled out the ramrod slung beneath the barrel from the 4 brass pipes that held it in place and tamped down the wadding and the bullet, all the while scanning the forest. He replaced the ramrod and brought the musket up to his hip, imagining the bristling line of soldiers to his left and right and drawing comfort from their stoic silence. He nudged the cock all the way back, the chunks of flint held in its steel jaws glinting with purpose. He stood like that for several seconds, his hands growing slick on the wooden portions of the gun. All too quickly, the nostalgia of the past bled away, leaving him alone again in a strange land very far from home. Another sound came somewhere to his left, and Kanoa moved towards it, allowing his senses to guide his feet as he kept his eyes searching for the shadows ahead. The stillness of the forest hung like a veil from the branches, and the longer he walked, the harder it seemed to push forward. He had decided he would only walk another 50 yards when he stepped into a clearing of what had only been an exceptionally bad day became a waking nightmare. And that is the end of chapter 3. Well guys, if you have enjoyed, as always, if you like, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Be on the lookout for new videos, new live streams and all that good stuff. I'm sorry if I butchered a little bit of it. Yeah, I need to read a bit more. I struggle with it a little bit sometimes, but yeah, don't forget guys, check out the merch and my P.O Box, and smack everything you see on screen with your face, especially if you're on a tablet. So hit the subscribe button, notification bell, all you know what to do. And also guys, don't forget to become a member if you aren't a member already. Like, it is completely optional, but if you want to become a member, go for it. I have members down below. And as always, I hope you guys enjoy, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye guys.